Good evening and welcome everyone to the first session that Chosen People Ministries are doing on the book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk. Not sure exactly how you pronounce it. It won't really make a big difference. Tonight, I'm going to I think I'll start with a question. What do you like when you don't get what you want? Can you think of a particular instance where you didn't get what you want? Or can you think of a situation where you looked out at your community or your country and thought, goodness me, this is a mess. Something's got to happen. Or can you think of a time when you just couldn't understand why God had appeared to allow injustice? Whether that's for you personally, or for you, somebody in your family, or someone in your church family even. Because Habakkuk's a fascinating book because it doesn't seem to be about it's not about a general situation. It's not like the other prophetic books like Amos, or with its long list of different judgments on different countries. In fact, Israel isn't even mentioned by name. And yet Habakkuk might well be one of the books in the Old Testament that Christians are most familiar with. So what is Habakkuk about? The first thing I suppose I want to just let you know is we don't know much about Habakkuk. Even the name, it could be a type of plant, or it could, if you take Luther's interpretation. Luther was the person who made a popular interpretation of it being from the word hazer, which means to embrace. And so Habakkuk is the embracer. I'm not sure that really fits particularly well with the content of the book. And it's unique amongst the pre-exilic prophets because rarely does a prophet take the title of a prophet. This is the only pre-exilic prophet described as a prophet. And yet when you look at it as prophecy, what's it adding? What prophetic information are we gaining from this book? There are kind of loads of questions that I've got about the book, and the Lord seems to be rather silent. There's a lot of what should we say? There are a lot of suggestions about the prophet Habakkuk, where he came from. Some of the Mishnah and the Talmud say that God sent Habakkuk to feed Daniel in the den, and that's how he survived. There's lots of mysterious things. When you don't know something about a person, there's never a real shortage of people to make stuff up. So let's look first at probably the only kind of clear thing we can see in chapter 1, verse 6, God says that he's raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people. That's really the best indicator that we have that this prophet is working or prophesying or worked before the Babylonian exile. It's not a great stretch, but that's all we can see. So think of Habakkuk. He's in Jerusalem, but it doesn't say. In fact, Israel doesn't even, the word Israel doesn't appear, as far as I can see, in any of the text. But it sounds to me like, it sounds to me as if he's, and many of the commentators sort of suggest this as an option. It sounds like he may well be a professional prophet working in the temple. So he may well be a professional prophet working in the temple. And what I'd like to do with these theories is see how, if we flesh that out a little bit, I think it'll help us to read this book better. So there were professional prophets in the temple, before pre-exilic. So let's imagine Habakkuk is a priest whose role is to be a prophet in the temple. Here is a faithful man whose job it is to be in the vicinity of the temple and to help talk and teach and comfort and console and pastor people coming into the temple. If you think about Jesus as a little child sitting around with the leaders of the temple, engaging them in conversation, and Jesus himself in the portico as an adult, it's that kind of a role. But this poor old prophet is working at a time when God's people, well, the northern tribes have been taken off into exile. And if, as some commentators suggest, he was working at a time when Jehoiakim was king, then Israel was kind of full of a mix of the righteous and the unrighteous. They certainly they had made themselves a vassal to the Assyrians. They were a vassal state to the Assyrians before, from 696 to 609. So a vassal state, it just means that they paid protection money to Assyria to stop Assyria from invading them. Well, we've learned, haven't we, over the last few years, over the books, that we're supposed to seek the Lord as our refuge, strength, and fortress, shield, and sword. So at the very least, we can say that Israel had put their hope in the protection of Assyria. My translation, the NIV, starts with the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. Your translation, I hope, is a bit better. It might say something like the oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. we're looking at a vision. We're looking at a vision, and the sense of the vision, the sense of an oracle, is that it's a sort of it's not something that is changed by the personality of the prophet, that it's almost like a fixed thing. So other oracles, if you think about Balaam and Balak, you know the story with the donkey, and there were a series of oracles spoken, and those oracles were fixed. In fact, the guy didn't want to say what he was actually saying. So here is God taking a strong hand over his prophet Habakkuk. And then what we see is something unusual, because what we see is a sort of a dialogue and then a psalm. What we see is a dialogue and a psalm. So you have two complaints or two questions, two answers, and then a song. So I found it very helpful to think about Habakkuk as working in the temple as a prophet, and maybe he plays the guitar, so maybe he's in a worship band, because the third chapter has quite a lot of musical stuff at the top and the bottom of the text. But this is a guy who's not willing to accept a simple concept about what it looks like to be in God's will. He's not going to accept. He's not going to accept the idea that to be in God's will is to have a blessed life for everything. You know, he's not going to accept a prosperity gospel. And in fact, look at how he begins. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? How long, oh Lord, must I? These are not calls of, he's not giving up on God. He doesn't understand why God seems absent. Why is he seeming so far? And as I said, a lot of the commentators say that the third section of the book is a psalm, but I'm beginning to think it's all very psalmic, if that is a word. Psalm 10, why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourselves in times of trouble? Seems almost exactly the same. Psalm 11, look, the wicked bend their bows, they set their arrows against the strings to shoot from the shadows at the upright at heart. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Psalm 12, help, Lord, for the godly are no more, the faithful have vanished from among men. Everyone lies to his neighbors, their flattering lips speak with deception. If your job is to represent the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what you can see is chaos, that is a difficult place for a representative to be. I'm trying to think. It's how does a Bible believing evangelical Christian who is working for the Church of England stand and represent God with that title hanging around him. How do they do that? And in fact, I saw an interview with Rico Tice, who's, he's now he's desperately trying to tell the bishops that they're serious about leaving. We're going to see the word coming out, which used to be for people coming out about their sexuality. It's soon going to be the term that's used for conservative evangelicals leading the church. But I use it as an illustration of this is a prophet at the end of his tether. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There's strife and conflict abounding. Therefore, the law is paralyzed. Justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, and justice is perverted. He's not talking about the Babylonians. He's not talking about the Assyrians. He's talking about his people, his community, his street, his neighborhood. And he's saying, if I can see destruction and violence, strife and conflict, why aren't you saving us from this? Are you suddenly busy? Are you disinterested? Are you disengaged? Because when the wicked hem in the righteous, justice is perverted, and justice is a key characteristic of our God. In Genesis 18, Abraham is pleading on behalf of Sodom. Do you remember that? He's pleading on behalf of Sodom, and he says, "Shall not the judge of the earth do what is just?" What Habakkuk is doing with this question is appealing to God's character. He's not saying you're absent. He's saying, given what I know about you, how can what I see be true? Given what I know about you, how can what I see be true? And sadly, the answer he gets from the Lord is not the answer he really wanted. And again, I feel like close to this prophet. The looking at personal circumstance and then challenging God on his character because your personal perception of the way you see the world isn't the way you want it to be. That's why I said at the beginning with this question, what do you like when you don't get what you really want? What Habakkuk wants is God to act. He wants him to act. And look at the Lord's speech from verse 5. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. It's great, isn't it? Have you ever encountered somebody who says, I'm going to tell you something, but you just won't believe it? Well, this is kind of the negative version of that. I'm raising up the Babylonians, the ruthless and impetuous people, who will sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They're a feared and dreaded people, a law unto themselves. They promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like the desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. I don't think that was really what Habakkuk was after. It's not what we are often after when we call out to God and complain about our circumstances. Habakkuk doesn't give up, however. In verse 12, he says, "O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, who will not die. O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O Rock, you've ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves?" Habakkuk is saying, Lord, you are just, but you weren't acting. I asked you why you weren't acting, and you said you were going to act in a way that I wouldn't believe. I'm going to send a wicked nation to deal with your wickedness. I'm going to send a wicked nation to deal with your wickedness. Isaiah's observation that his ways are not our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts could be a perfectly reasonable paraphrase for this little section. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Here's where I think I've seen more clearly, looking at this, how difficult it would be to understand God's plan and character if I didn't have the New Testament. So if I didn't have 2 Peter 3:16, is it? The Lord is not slow, as some understand slowness, but wants everyone to come to repentance and faith. You know, remember that a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. It helps me to see that he tolerates the treacherous. Very often, that's me. Why sometimes is he silent as the wicked swallow up the righteous? Well, now he's opening for me a can of worms, because how do I know who's righteous and who's wicked? Surely that's I'm not capable of making that judgment. The judgment that I seem to be capable of making is the judgment that God isn't acting the way he should do in various situations that I have observed from the outside with very little knowledge of actually what's really going on. So he sees wickedness and he sees brokenness in his community. He calls out for some sort of action, and God's solution to the problem is to send this fearsome warrior nation. Look at the descriptions: swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallop headlong, their horsemen come from afar. These are all very beautiful graphic images of just how frightening this threat is going to be. The hordes advance like a desert wind. They gather prisoners like sand. If you are in a desert and the wind picks up, it's horrendous. I've been in a small sandstorm. It is horrendous. It's terrifying. You can't see. You don't know how long it's going to last. You don't know what the consequences are going to be. The camels remarkably seem completely unbothered by the whole thing, but I guess that's because camels are supposed to be there and humans are not. But nonetheless, the experience is terrifying. And if they gather prisoners like sand, you know, we're used to thinking of Abraham looking up, God showing Abraham the stars and saying, your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars or the sand, particles of sand on the sea. But here we just see this terrifying, all-powerful group of people that are going to sweep down to judge Israel, to judge Judah, to judge Jerusalem. It's a bit like, I don't know what the modern, you know, none of us have probably really experienced kind of leopards chasing us, or wolves surrounding us at dusk, or vultures swooping down to devour. But we've probably all been, we've all probably been in situations where we feel very threatened. I remember as a child being at a football match, and I remember the police horses being forced towards us to try and deal with some crowds. It was terrifying. Or maybe you've been out late at night and seen a gang walking towards you, people that you don't recognize in a place that you're not very confident of, and you felt that threat. Habakkuk's reaction to this, the way God is acting, is, I think, incredibly faithful. He wants, his response is to say, okay, you're going to send the Babylonians. Okay, they're going to be, they're terrifying. I never would have thought that using, as verse 11, chapter 1, verse 11 says, using guilty men whose strength is their God. That's the very opposite. That's the very opposite kind of person that you want to send to resolve this. And in verses 14 to 17, you've made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler. The sea is often a picture of chaos in Hebrew kind of thought. Now men are like fish in the sea, numerous, but without a leader. Numerous, but without a leader, like sea creatures that have no ruler. So they're numerous, but vulnerable. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net. He burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choices of food. Choices of food. Is he to keep on emptying his net and destroying nations without mercy? I love the way that Bible uses humor, or kind of, it's a sort of a parody in a way. We think we can see this man who uses his net to catch fish and ends up worshipping the net that he's throwing out, or that he's dragging, or the fishing line that he's using, instead of giving the right, well, instead of worshipping the creator who gave him the life, gave him the boat, gave him the skills, and made the fish for him. To make the mistake of worshipping what we do instead of who made us. Would we? So Habakkuk in verse 2 says, in chapter 2, verse 1 says, he's going to stand and look and see what God has to say. See what answer you can give to my complaint. The answer comes back almost like a stage magician. Have you ever been to one of those magic shows where there's a box hanging at the top of the stage from the very beginning, and it hangs in plain sight for the whole time, and at the end they ask a question and they lower the box and the answer's in the box, and you're like, huh? How on earth did the guy know that the little girl was going to draw a giraffe, a monkey, and a donkey, and give their names as Bert, Ethel, and Marjorie? And everyone's clapping because they just can't understand how someone could see so far forward so accurately. But that's the essence of the Lord's answer in chapter 2. What he's saying to Habakkuk is right, is I tell you what you can do, right? I'll tell you what's going to happen. Write it down, keep it, and then when it happens, you'll see. You'll see that I'm sovereign. You'll see that I'm in control, and you can see that I am your refuge and your strength. Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that in my one it says, so that a herald may run with it. Better to think, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, yes. So that a herald may run with it, yes, maybe you could read it like that. But better to think of it as writing it in plain letters. I think the Hebrew, as I remember the Hebrew, something like has the idea of running, but not the idea of the herald running. The idea is that it's almost like it's writing on a billboard that's so clear that you can see it as you run past it. And then he says to Habakkuk, the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end. It will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. what God is telling Habakkuk is that there is a judgment coming and that the time has been appointed. Some appointments are more important than others, aren't they? If you're meeting a friend, that's one thing. If you're a bit late, that doesn't really matter. But if you've got an appointment with the dentist or with the cardiologist or with a lawyer or with a judge in court or those kinds of appointments, they're at a fixed place and a fixed time. That's the idea here. It's a fixed time and place. So he's saying, I fixed the time and place. I'm going to write, you can write it all down, and so you'll see exactly what happens when it actually happens. But guess what? Although it will not prove false, it will linger. Habakkuk, you're a great one for pointing out the things that I'm not doing. But I know you, Habakkuk, he says. I'm going to tell you that this is going to happen, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to have to wait. And as you wait and trust me, your faith will grow. We won't look at the text in any more detail from that point on, only to say that in chapter 2, verse 14, we see the picture of the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Having this text has given me the chance to think about what does it mean, the waters cover the sea? I mean, I know that the sea, I know that the sea is water, but what does it mean, the water, as the waters cover the sea? And I think what it means is it's just a picture of perfectness. Like you don't, where the water is, the sea is, and where the sea is, the water is, and it's complete. And so the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. That's the promise that God makes. And what he asks of Habakkuk is that you wait faithfully for my plans to be executed. I think that's why Habakkuk is the story of God's relationship with one of his prophets, and how God took him from confusion to clarity. His conversation led him to the choir. His conversation with God led him to the choir. He's a prophet at the end of his tether who ends up playing the strings on his guitar, if you like the musical kind of analogy. He starts off with all his strings are all breaking every time he can't play his guitar. He doesn't feel right about it. And in his engagement with God in conversation, he grows in faith and so is able to rise above his circumstances and rejoice. Paul uses bits of Habakkuk in Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, where he's explaining that nobody is justified before God by the law. Only faith can produce a righteous life, essentially. In 2:6, the same point he makes, that humans are not justified by the law, but by faith. And very famously in Romans chapter 1:13. This is a righteousness that is revealed by faith from first till last. And then it makes reference back to Habakkuk and actually back to Abraham. Because in Genesis 15:6, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. In stark contrast to Adam and Eve, who did not believe God and decided to go their own way, not his way. What's so good about Habakkuk's faith is that it works when the fig trees are not in bud, when there are no grapes on the vine, the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, when there are no sheep in the pen, no cattle in the stalls. Yet, he says, I will rejoice in the Lord and be joyful in God my Saviour. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of the deer. He enables me to go on the heights. This is the story of the faithful transformation of a disciple's life. Habakkuk is a prophet, but this isn't so much about, and we'll see this as we go through it in more detail, this is not so much about his being prophetic. It's about God, his conversation, his prayers and conversations with God, transforming his understanding of God's eternal plan. Paul says that that you can't hope for something you already have. And all of us can be happy when we get what we want. But where God wants us to be, heading towards, is Philippians chapter 4, where Paul says, I've learnt the secret of being content in all circumstances, whether well-fed or hungry, rich or poor, happy or sad, whatever, I can rejoice because I know the Lord's plan, and I know his plan is just. I know his plan is amazing, and my immediate circumstances are irrelevant because my worldview is eternal. And again, briefly, he makes my feet like the feet of a deer, enables me to go on the heights. There's so many, we'll have time to look at this in more detail. The sovereign, if you watch those nature films where you see those deer on the cliffs, you think, how on earth can they stand? They can virtually run across a cliff. And you think, what on earth that's some evolutionary process right there. What did they run up there? The ones that survive, reproduce and know how to reproduce so that they can do it better, and gradually over enough time, they can actually do that. It just doesn't make sense. There's also this idea that he equips us to go to places that otherwise we wouldn't be safe in. He enables me to go on the heights. His purpose in growing our faith is to take us to new heights. That's his character, that's his nature. He takes us to new heights by revealing to us as much of his plan as he can that we can grasp. And then he invites us, like he invites Habakkuk, to wait. Though his promises may linger, wait for them. It will certainly come and will not delay. If you're waiting for something, take that as a promise. If you're waiting for something that you feel is delayed, the Lord says to you, it's not delayed. It'll happen at the appointed time. And he's inviting you to trust him in that. So I hope that's been a good introduction to the book. My hope is that you'll have the time between now and next week to read the book for yourself. I know that Estelle has already read it once. But I hope now when you read it, you'll begin to have opinions about the text. You'll begin to see things, and that next week when we come back, you'll have stuff to ask and more questions for me and Fiona. But that's it for this evening.